Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're honored to have Representative Mike Chapman join us this morning. And we, as we normally do, will allow Representative Chapman to give a brief introduction and talk about the things he's working on and the legislature in general is working on for our state. We try to focus most everything on business in this forum. And then if you have any questions for him, if you want to put your question or even just your name into the chat, I will go ahead and call on you. I know that Jennifer Burkhart has to leave early this morning, so I'll call on her first if she's still on when we get to that section. But we try to make this a very respectful but robust debate forum for us to be able to ask questions of our representative in the legislature so that he can share what he's working on and what's happening in our, you can share what's happening in your world, in our communities. I know that Representative Chapman is a very ardent supporter of businesses in Clallam County. So just from my experience, what I've been seeing, he's there trying to help the small businesses across his district and especially Clallam because of course he lives in Clallam. So thank you so much, Representative Chapman, for joining us, and go ahead and take the floor.
Well, thanks. I'll keep my opening remarks brief, but I do want to put on the record that I'm filling in for Jennifer Burkhart because apparently she couldn't stay the whole hour. So the fact that she gets the first question, I don't know, it doesn't seem, but we'll get, I definitely want to hear her healthcare question because that's a huge issue for our district. So maybe I should just take her question right out of the gate since I embarrassed her. So for folks who don't know, Jennifer was supposed to be your program this morning, which I know you all would have much rather heard from her than me, but apparently she's busier than I am. So
I admitted that it was on our side that we didn't confirm that. So Jennifer, if you want to ask a question, please feel free. She's a board member of ours too.
Good morning. Thanks for the embarrassment and teasing. I appreciate that. I do have a question, and it is on behalf of Olympic Medical Center, but also more broadly for businesses, because the bill I'm concerned about is not specific to healthcare only. And this is House Bill 1076, the Key Tam bill. And we've talked about that previously, and I know it's one that seems to be progressing. For those on the phone, this is a bill that was pending last year, and Representative Chapman, you were very helpful in raising our concerns, and it didn't pass, which we were glad to see. This bill would allow private citizens to sue on behalf of the government in exchange for a portion of the proceeds of the financial award. And this is a law modeled after one in California. So what it allows is those wage and hour lawsuits and other types of lawsuits against employers would be much more available to labor unions, to other employees, to representatives to sue on behalf of staff. And it expands the frivolous and abusive litigation that is possible, and something that I think is going to be really difficult for our business community in general if it passes. So I wondered if you could provide some comments on both how the opposition is stacking up to this bill, and then what progress it is making, and the chance that it might proceed through the legislature and be successful during this session.
Thank you. It is a bill that's been it's a bill that's heavily supported by trial lawyers and labor unions. It has passed out of the labor committee. It just passed the last two sessions, I believe, and it just passed this week out of the labor committee. It's a partisan vote. And last year there were a number of us in the House Democrat caucus who raised concerns about the impacts on local hospitals, and local businesses, and it did not pass, didn't come up for a vote in the House. I fully expect that it will come up for a vote in the House this year. I think there's 4 or 5 of us solidly opposed, but that isn't enough to stop the bill. So I expect that it will pass out of the House this year. When it goes to the Senate, it might have a more difficult journey. So I'm not as up. It was fairly, because it was a short session, there was enough opposition, but some of the opposition, they're no longer in the legislature. So that's always that we lost. I can think of 3 people who were opposed last year who are no longer serving and were replaced in a couple of cases by probably folks. Well, one person who was opposed was replaced by a trial lawyer. So I don't think so. That definitely is a change. So I wish I was more optimistic. I have been a solid no on this issue, mainly out of my support for the hospital and the worries of what it would open. There's a number of civil litigant bills that are in play this session that I think would really potentially damage our district. But I do, Jennifer, I do wish I was more optimistic, seeing that it's moved out of labor already. The prime sponsor, this is one that just bothers me. It's not an ethics issue, but the prime sponsor is a trial lawyer, and there's some concern that his personal law firm would benefit from these kinds of cases. I'm not disparaging. Look, it's a citizen legislature. People elect us from all kinds of. So I have a background in law enforcement, so certainly I have a right to sponsor law enforcement policy and that sort of thing. But in today's world, it seems like that has raised some concern. But I think it'll pass the House, and I think I do know for a fact that the senator from Seattle who would hear the bill in committee is actually opposed to how it's written that would come out of the House. And the 2 sponsors from the House and the Senate, the 2 chairs that oversee the 2 committees, if you can imagine 2 trial lawyers, they don't agree. So they're both trial lawyers and they don't agree. So it could be that the Senate, and I'm not a trial lawyer, and Jennifer would understand the nuances but when you hear them discuss it in public, it does appear that they have some differences. So maybe the Senate would amend the House version if the House version passed. I think that's the hope. It is a bill that gets a lot of lobbying, both pro and con, and everybody seems to think that the senator from Seattle, downtown Seattle, would maybe amend the bill to maybe not make it quite as difficult on local hospitals and businesses. Anyway, I'm way outside my lane of travel because I'm not a trial lawyer. So I've just relied upon the advice, solid advice. And when someone like Jennifer says this would really hurt Olympic Medical Center's ability to provide healthcare for our district, that seems to be, in this case, that's kind of enough for me. Seems like a pretty good piece of advice to follow.
Well, this is
I
one.
butchered the answer. Maybe Jennifer can help clarify and clean up my mistakes on the bill.
No, not at all. That was an excellent answer, and thank you for it. I would urge those on the call today to take a look at House Bill 1076, because it definitely applies to more businesses than just healthcare. And right now, the structure in Washington State is such that if an employee has a concern about any sort of employment term or condition, so for example, if they think they're misclassified as an independent contractor or exempt or non-exempt and think they're entitled to overtime, they go through the Department of Labor and Industries, and that agency investigates, looks into the matter, helps resolve it with the employer. But this would allow the incident to go directly to litigation. So it would open up to a great degree the magnitude of litigation against businesses. And it creates really an unnecessary remedy, because there's already a remedy. The Department of Labor and Industries does a fine job with these kinds of complaints. So it seems unnecessary, but it is something that the trial lawyers would benefit from at the expense of business. So I think that's one that the business community should consider speaking up, especially it sounds like to the Senate, perhaps Senator Van de Weg. My follow-up question is, what other bills do you see pending? You mentioned litigation and others. What other bills should we be on the lookout for that are disadvantageous to our economic development in Clallam County?
There's a, there'll be a, excuse me, there'll be a number coming out of labor. I have some concerns with House Bill 1097. It's a request legislation from the governor to increase worker protections. Look, I'm a former member of numerous labor unions. I was a founding member of a guild. So I'm solidly in favor of labor unions and the ability of workers to bargain. One of the things that's bothered me when I've been in the legislature, though, is that many unions want to codify in state law issues that should be bargained locally. So we pass, and a lot of them do pass, but a lot of bills are introduced that when you read them, you're like, that would be a great issue for a local union to bargain with their employer, as opposed to codifying it in state law. And I think that is the rub. I think with many of us who support labor unions' ability and want to see more labor union bargaining, and you look at Olympic Medical Center, and they're always working with their labor unions. But then when you codify it in state law, it then shows up at the small business owner who may or may not even have how many employees. And sometimes these laws really are damaging to very small businesses, which I don't think is the intent. But so they start off as great ideas. So if you're serious, I think the business community watches what comes out of the labor committee, and I think they're constantly raising the issue that those are good policy for labor unions to bargain. They may not work in the small business arena, when right now so many small businesses they're not hiring and they're probably laying people off. So it just adds another layer of stress on a small business owner. And if we're not careful, we're going to have small businesses in our state that just are kind of refusing to hire people and just will not expand. I actually have talked with at least two, but I would say I bet it's closer to half a dozen this year, small businesses who actually had enough business to hire and just said no, I'm not gonna hire anybody. I'll just do my thing. And they get called and they're like, yep, I'm 6 months away from doing X, Y, or Z, whatever service they provide. They're just not going to hire anybody. Now that's not the state's best interest. It's not in our local economy's best interest to have policies being put in place. It is reminiscent of the landlords right now. People are complaining there's no rental units. Well, I've talked with the landlord, a group of landlords. They're selling their homes as fast as they can and getting out of the business, because though it was, altruistic and nobody wanted to collect rent from people who were out of work, we didn't make the landlords whole, and many of them held mortgages. And so the ability to find a rental house in Clallam County and other small communities is virtually non-existent. And that's because people are just selling their home. And the only way now under current law that you can ask someone to leave is if you sell your home. That is still allowed under law, that if you sell the home, then the person has to vacate. And I verified that yesterday, but in no other case can you ask anyone to vacate. I've talked with landlords who know their tenants are working. They know who they work for. They know they didn't lose their job, and their tenants are telling them, I don't have to pay rent. The governor says I don't have to pay rent. And they're then just saying, well, then I'm going to put my house. If you had an underlying mortgage, not many people would be able to go for very long without collecting rent. So I think these are great policies. I mean, the unintended consequence, though, is the rental industry will be non-existent. There was a slate of bills last session that well, we could talk about this all day long, but probably not anyway. I want to do one of the other questions, which let's just jump into questions.
Okay, if anyone has some, I'll start then. Representative Chapman, can you share with us your view on the different broadband bills that have been proposed and which ones you see are gaining more traction than others? And is there a general view of different parties being able to do broadband than what was allowed, retail internet providers than what we've had previously? And will there be any supportive funding for people that are in poverty that can't afford basic broadband service?
Well, there is a bill to allow the local PUDs to have retail authority. So
Trial lawyer from Seattle introduced the bill.
Sorry about that.
yeah, Representative Hansen from Kitsap County, who's the sponsor of KETAM, also sponsored the broadband bill to give PUDs retail authority. That's actually an issue Representative Theringer and I worked on a couple of years ago, and we kind of got our heads handed to us. So he took it on. He seems to have worked out a compromise with the telecoms. We'll see. I think that bill has a chance. So PUDs, some PUDs would like the retail authority, many don't. So it's not widely popular. I mean, that's a whole nother layer of service that I'm not sure every PUD, and I don't even know where Clallam County PUD is on this issue, if this is something they want to do. But it does seem like giving PUDs the authority, not a shall, but might provide. They do have the ability to provide service. Representative Theringer continues to put extra money into the governor's office of broadband. And then there's the Community Economic Revitalization Board that I serve on that also has money to issue in broadband grants, usually for the backbone. The kicker is in very rural areas. It wouldn't matter how much government subsidized it. It's still, it's not going to pay for itself. However, the Starlink that Elon Musk of Tesla fame that he's launched, apparently people in Western Clallam County are getting service, and apparently it's really good. And I know the whole tribe is hooked up. And I just read something, you can now go on to the Starlink's website and reserve service as they launch more satellites. So it could be that technology will just bypass the whole line item, and pretty soon we'll just be getting it beamed down from space. It looks like I've talked with a number of people who are getting the Starlink service in rural areas. It's one of those things you could put $1 billion into it and it wouldn't be enough. I know Congressman Kilmer keeps talking about a huge package out of Congress, but it never seems to materialize. I think we're making progress. There is money. The governor has an office of broadband. He does. Representative Theringer does put a chunk of money in that, and so more work to come. With schools being shut down and people remotely working, it's obviously become a huge issue for the rural communities around the state.
So thank you. If I know several people here on this call have Starlink, if you have Starlink right now, can you put in the chat what you're getting in upload and download speeds? I've been hearing great things, over 100 megabits per second download. Reve, you have your hand up? Would you like to ask?
Just kind of on that broadband issue and Starlink, we're beta testing Starlink here. Although we do notice it goes down for short little blips. And like, for instance, I lost this call for about 15 seconds, but manageable compared to what we were getting, which was 3 megabytes before. I'm doing a speed test right now. It's at 155. So it's tremendously better. But on that note, we have a lot of people that just can't afford the upfront cost. It's about $600 by the time you pay shipping. So we have a lot of low-income families that could really benefit out here. I just wanted to throw out there, if there's any way to get some grant money to get people into high-speed internet like Starlink, I know that could go to really good use, at least out here on the West End where we have tremendously slow speeds.
I know the state did have money to help the Ho tribe become one of the first pilot projects, and I know that it is one of the areas of support in these challenging economic times that we're trying to figure out how to. A couple of bills have looked at a rebate for broadband, and there's a bill for education rebate, but the school districts are not real. That would take away money from the school district and rebate it back to parents who are trying to connect their kids. There is, I think, a movement afoot. I think the superintendent of public instruction is trying to get a computer to every kid, at least that needs one. But there's a lot of talk, but it's very difficult. The state is really not set up to give money to individuals except for through the established programs. So those are the challenges during these times.
I hate to put Karen Goshen on the spot, but the port has funded the broadband analysis for our county, trying to determine where the gaps are and what next steps can be. Karen, are you able to give a quick overview to everyone on it?
Yeah, I can do that. We're still a couple of months away from finishing the report. We have a GIS map with various layers that shows where service currently is at. And one of the things that we're looking at on that map and where we see the gaps is it's going to be most cost effective to extend service from the last point and extend it, as opposed to jumping over areas where you have miles to go to get some type of backbone in. We are looking at various technologies that some areas may only be able to be cost effectively served by satellite, where other areas may have some different options. So we're still, I would say, a month or two away. We're still filling in some gaps on that map, but we've made good progress in identifying what we have. And we can prove that it's very different than what's on the FCC maps, which says if one house has coverage, then the whole census tract has coverage. So we can identify which areas in that census tract really does not have coverage. And then they're also looking at various, the different entities are looking at when a city provided a franchise to a broadband company, that they promised to provide X amount of service in the area. So one of the next steps will be, how did what we found out on service compared to the requirements of that provider who made the commitment to provide service. So there's still more steps to go, but it will give us what we need to be able to apply for grants and show that the FCC coverage is not accurate, that we have these speed band tests, which are critically important to making that case.
Great. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, everyone, I'm going to switch to another subject, and that's the Roadmap to Recovery program that the governor implemented, which has allowed the certain counties to open, mostly all around us, but has placed us in a region with Kitsap and Mason counties, and has not allowed our restaurants or fitness centers to open until it will be reviewed again. The Department of Health and the governor will announce the next 2-week review on this Friday. I understand there's been bills to address that and give more power to the legislature and reduce the authorities that the governor has during emergencies. Representative Chapman, can you address those bills and if there's any progress and what your view is on those issues?
Well, obviously, myself and my seatmates, agreed with public health and disagreed with the initial rollout of the governor's approach to our district. There's a lot of concern over regionalization, both at the public health arena and also through these new metrics. And so lumping us in with Kitsap and Mason County is a real problem because they have a prison that's had a huge outbreak. So unless there's some credit given again for the prison outbreak, I don't know that we'll ever meet the metrics anytime soon. So, you know, we put out a strong statement. That's always difficult to do, but I do appreciate both our public health officers. I see Ron Allen's on the call. I saw an email from Ron Allen, much along the similar lines that the statement that the three of us put out. And I think generally it's been heartening to hear the community speak as one voice. And really that voice is just asking for more clarification and more coordination with our local health officers. Both Dr. Locke in Jefferson County and Dr. Berry in Clallam County have done a phenomenal job, along with the sheriff's office. I don't know if people realize Ron Cameron, the undersheriff, is in charge of emergency management. He's been in charge of so much of the PPE that's come in to the county and the coordination. And those individuals have worked tirelessly for the last year, almost now, 11 months, 10 months. And so the governor's office kind of blindsided everybody with this new approach. So I think some pushback, but it quite frankly, neither Steve nor Kevin nor I have heard back from the governor's office. So I have no idea what he's looking at. I do know he has a new health officer from Texas, and the individual's commuting from Houston via Zoom. And I believe he's kind of the one thought process. So if he's from Texas, doesn't really know Washington, certainly doesn't know Clallam or Jefferson County. It could be that the advice, I don't know how they do things in Texas, and I wouldn't hold Texas up as a model for fighting coronavirus either. I mean, they've had their own issues, but if he's looking in Houston, looking at the maps and breaking things down, I don't know where that came from. But there's also a bill to regionalize public health boards. And that kind of came out of an issue in Spokane where the Board of Commissioners removed a health officer, of which your local Board of Health, has some authority in those areas, and that's a local control. So that's something that I'm opposing as well. But right now there's very little coordination, it appears, between the governor's office and any of our public health officials. But we just keep every day you open the newspaper, the numbers are dropping. We're doing a good job. I think Clallam and Jefferson have traditionally had some of the lowest, if not the lowest rates of infection. I think we've had look just anecdotally, we've complied with the mask mandate. I think if you look at, I saw something that over 2,000 restaurants have closed in Washington. Since and that more, the hospitality industry has described it as that they're on their deathbed, that they don't know that they'll survive another couple weeks, couple months. So if that's the goal, I mean, that's the unintended consequence, I suppose, of, and I will say there was, this is just anecdotal. This isn't scientific, but I was walking down the street in Port Townsend, and I was stopped by a restaurant, a lady that owns, I think, 3 restaurants in Port Townsend. Truth be told, I mean, she's a solid supporter. I mean, she's a Democrat. She's a solid supporter of the governor. We had a long conversation. Her point was, I can keep people safer in my restaurant. I've increased my airflow. I'm following the rules. My tables are socially distanced. My servers are wearing PPE. My food is safe. But by closing me down during the holidays, you pushed everybody into homes. And she just thought it was nuts because in one respect, it just forced everybody. And she said, I guarantee you nobody's home is going to have the airflow needed. Not during the holidays, not when it's cold. Nobody's going to enforce the rules. There's certainly not going to be a socially distance. So she was frustrated, and she felt like her business was just being singled out when really there has been, at least on the peninsula, she knew, and I have not been corrected, that there's been no major outbreaks that's come from restaurants. So I think the restaurant industry is hanging by a thread. I think we'll always have Chipotle and McDonald's and the drive-through places and the big chains that can mitigate their losses from a national and a worldwide perspective. But I think that your local restaurant, if something doesn't change soon, they can't hang on. It's the information that I'm being given. And this is just, again, this is what the industry is telling us. This is what people on the street are telling me. And this is what restaurant owners are telling me. So I find that really sad that we've just obliterated a whole industry. The other thing too is I did confirm in another meeting I had, that they're seeing an increase in opioid addictions and other substance abuse addictions, and it's directly related to the loss of job and the loss of jobs in the hospitality industry, where individuals had cleaned up their life or getting, but when they lost their job, they lost their hope and they lost their ability to have health care or income, and they're back. And so we're seeing the substance abuse providers and the homeless are a direct result of people losing their jobs, even with the unemployment and it's the consistency of going to work every day. It's not just the money, it's the consistency and the discipline of having a job and having people rely upon you and wanting to work. And so that's been that people are really raising alarms about the substance abuse skyrocketing in our community.
Thank you. Not the
I
most.
wish I better. We as a society are accepting that we're going to beat coronavirus at the expense of a lot of other social issues. And our kids have lost a whole year of learning. So education folks are telling me that, and other people can disagree, but the law. And then I also was in a meeting where reports of suicide among young people are rising because of their depression and not being allowed to have the interactions that they need. I don't know if you all saw Oregon prioritized, after healthcare workers and first responders, they prioritized vaccinating their teachers. And Governor Inslee was asked if he would prioritize teachers so we could reopen schools, and he said no. But the Oregon governor did prioritize teachers, and they're on a quicker path to reopen. We all have to ask ourselves a question: what have we done to our kindergartners, first graders, second graders, third graders, fifth graders, junior high kids in protecting society? What's the long-term damage and what's the long-term cost? And if we're not all asking that question, then I guess, it's something I think about every day. And I know too many people whose kids are not, students are getting not passing. A students are just checking out, and we're losing. Anyway, these are not official. These are just my beliefs that we have to decide. Look, beating the virus is important, but our kids are pretty damn important too. And we don't know the damage. People are telling me it's real, and it's coming out of various school districts, and school districts have done the best they can with the rules they had.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it does make sense, especially for extroverts that don't have that social interaction, that there'd be negative impacts to people's lives, especially young people's lives. So I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anyone want to raise their hand? Okay, Chair Allen has a question.
Well, I was just gonna, you've raised it, I was gonna put it in the chat column, going to Mike's comment. Jamestown, because we're a tribe, have more flexibility on how we can help addressing the needs of our Olympic Peninsula, Clallam and Jefferson County. So we're taking a little different approach. I think the world of Tom Locke and Allison Unthank about their guidance, and I understand the governor's desire to try to create consistency on how to deal with it. But quite frankly, our experience is that if you want to get people vaccinated, you have to just be more flexible. If I have a 65-year-old person coming in and they're accompanied by their 25-year-old daughter, I'm vaccinating her too. So they're coming into the line, and you got to process them. We've discovered everybody seems to know how we should do it, but we're moving to, given we have the vaccines, 1,000 a day. So Mike's point is well taken. We're doing well out here in the peninsula compared to the other counties in the state, and we're going to keep going at it. And it's really, we're fortunate we in the Olympic Medical Center are doing better at getting a better share of vaccines. So we're going to keep doing it. We're just going to keep asking for it. And so far, we're getting more and more. But the problem is you don't know until a week before how many vaccines you get. So we ask for 4,000, we get 2,000. So, it's that kind of situation. So, we're trying to bump it up. But that's relative to Mike's point. If we can get more and more vaccinated, we can get, the businesses back up and running and get to phase 2. I worked on, I kind of heavy-handed. I followed Mike and Steve and Kevin's berating the governor about King County going into phase 2 before us. And, you shake your head and scratch your head. What the hell's going on here? So it is what it is, and we just have to deal with it. I understand we're supposed to go to phase 2 next week. And it's a good sign because the numbers are going down with the criteria is going down, which is a good thing. But phase 2 by itself is not going to save those small businesses Mike's talking about. That's 25% of capacity is a tough thing to do for a small business. So it's a huge issue. Our view is we're going to just try to get as many of our community vaccinated as possible. And we're working our tail off. And I just want to do a shout out. All those nurses that we employ and OMC employees and the volunteers that come in, it's cold out there, guys, and their hands are freezing. And while they're trying to vaccinate these people, and so we're rotating them to get them vaccinated. So they're hands up to them. They're doing a great job. And that's all we really can do on that matter. I do want to just touch on the bill, which I think is going nowhere, Mike, on the regionalization of public health officials. It's a terrible idea. I just want you to know, I've called the governor. They said they know it's not going anywhere. So we want to make sure you guys kill it because it's a bad idea with regard to public health officials. We got to come up with a better idea rather than that regionalized concept that they're advocating. So they claim that they just want to get it on the table for discussion. So what's the better solution? So I just want to share that, from our perspective from Jamestown in our clinic. So we're doing what we can to help that cause to try to get our community back up and running. Oh, one more thing. We don't agree with the governor, nor I agree with Karen Unthank about the teachers. Here in Sequim, we have around 225 or so, I don't give or take. And they only want me to vaccinate 50 and older. I'm kind of going, that's just ridiculous. If I'm processing through 1,000 a day, I'm not processing through all the damn teachers. I'm just kind of going, get them all vaccinated so they're safe, so they can go into those classrooms with those kids as soon as we can get them back to school. So those are things you just kind of go, okay, well, I'm not staying in that lane. I'm kind of broadening my lane out a little bit here for our community. So those are things that you kind of scratch your head about common sense.
Well, thank you, Chair Allen.
Let me
Yes,
follow up?
please.
Ron, I do have to people need to understand. I've heard from Dr. Maxwell late last week, and I've heard from a couple of other healthcare professionals. Your work, Ron, around the vaccine is the reason why we're bumping up to 20% vaccination rate in Clallam County. And the clinic that Dr. Maxwell oversees is really appreciative for the extra vaccine that you were able to acquire. And I hope people realize, with all the last couple of years of Ron and Jamestown and the Matt Clinic, I hope people realize that they are an incredible provider of healthcare services in our community. And once again, prove that, like Ron just said, if they're in my line, they're going to get vaccinated. He's here to provide services to make our community safer. And for anybody who still opposes their expansion efforts to provide more services at a time when we know the opioid addictions are rising again, just continues to be incredulous to me. And I continue to lend all of my public support to their efforts to build a world-class clinic in Sequim. Thank them every day for all the services they provide. Thank them for their partnerships and their partnerships with our healthcare providers throughout the peninsula. And you will never convince me otherwise that Ron and his team and the Jamestown tribe have nothing but the very best in mind for our community. And don't forget, they're one of the largest, if not, I think you're the largest private employer now in Clallam County. So they also create jobs in all the industries: hospitality, gaming, recreation, natural resources. They're an amazing provider. And I shudder to think what our community demographics, what we would look like without the Jamestown tribe as such a great partner, both economically with unemployment and healthcare and all the other, Ron has a list of services he provides. And I will never be convinced otherwise, but that they are the finest partner we could ever ask for. So I have to say that publicly, Ron.
Thank you, Mike. We are over 800 employees now, but we and our sister tribes, we do our part. So we're a part of the community, and that's our view, philosophical view. We all contribute, and so we do our part.
So thank you. I want to call on Rod Fleck. I know Forks Hospital and Rod have been out there on the Forks end handing out vaccinations as well on Saturdays and such, where I couldn't get a hold of him because, or I did, is he's guiding people through lines over at their high school. So Rod, you've got your hand up with the question.
Well, I do, and it's to follow up a little bit on what the chairman said. Out on the west end, the clinic in the wilderness, we are doing we can do as many as 80 vaccinations an hour. But unlike the good chairman, we don't have the official authority to broaden our lane. And has there been any legislative discussions with the governor about his consistency on vaccines, where he doesn't have a consistency on things like poverty, economic development, other things when it comes to our rural communities? So, sir, we the city council passed a resolution joining in with you and your two colleagues and others on the peninsula, raising challenges with the governor's road to recovery metrics. But we're also kind of dealing with the issue of how we can reach our goal of 6,000 to 7,000 people vaccinated here on the west end of our 10,000 people. And it's a massive undertaking. Our clinic out here has about 250 people hours per day we do it, of volunteer staff, etc. And it would be nice to have the same flexibility in writing that the chairman enjoys on the east side of the county.
I agree. And Ron, you mentioned the regionalization of public health. Don't lose sight of that bill. It is actually scheduled to be voted out of committee this week. Now, whether it gets voted out of committee, I don't know. And you all might want to contact Rep. Theringer because he serves on the healthcare committee, but I saw that it was on their potential list of bills to vote out. There are still people who want to see that bill move forward in some form. So I'm not ready to, if we get through Monday and it doesn't get voted out, then we can take a sigh of relief. But I think that bill is still alive. And that, Rod, that brings up a good point. We at the state, and it's not my, I would support that, but I would love to see the executive branch respect and honor the work of local public health officials and to give the flexibility. I think Ron makes a really good point that if people are in line, they're there, let's get them back, let's get them vaccinated and give the flexibility to the local health officers. I made on the regionalization, if Rod or someone in Forks has a question on public health, you know who they can call if they need an answer and they can't get an answer, if they just aren't getting the answer, they get to call Bill Peach, because Bill Peach is on the Board of Health and Bill Peach represents the West End. If you go to a regional approach, someone from Forks is going to have to try to reach somebody in either it could be Kitsap or it could be Olympia. Well, it could be a person who's never been to Forks. So that's what we're talking about. Your ability to get information from your local public health and get an answer and get help is the difference between being able to call your county commissioner or one of the other representatives on the Board of Health, or walk down to the courthouse and make an appointment to meet, to go to the clinic across from Safeway, versus communicating with somebody completely outside our area. That's why this bill is so, we'd be going the wrong way. We'd be centralizing public health at a time when we should be respecting the work of the local officials. I trust Olympic Medical Center. I trust Forks Hospital. I trust the Jamestown Clinic. I trust Dr. Maxwell, that when they get the vaccines, they know how to distribute this. I trust these people. I trust Dr. Berry. I trust Dr. Locke. I've worked with Dr. Locke for over 20 years. I trust these people to do the very best to keep us safe. And that's what I wish we could get from Olympia. And it's an executive branch. Public health is under the executive branch. Ron says that we're more flexible. He just put a great comment in the chat box. Mr. Chairman says we're also more flexible with what we identify as frontline employees. The senior citizens are the most vulnerable, and we do respect that fact, of course. But you make a great point about people, the teachers and other, Dr. Maxwell told me last week, every dose of vaccine that is coming into Clallam County is getting into an arm, almost within the time frame. And other communities cannot say that. So we're doing something right here. We have the infrastructure set up that every dose that comes in is getting into people's arms. We also have a community that is accepting the vaccine, and that's a problem in other communities. So why we be punished right now, or would appear that we've been, I don't know, punished, but that our experts have been questioned, I would say that, by someone who's just coming here from Texas, is incredulous. That's what upset the three of us, Steve, Kevin, and I, so much. And that was why we put out such a strong statement that, many people disagree that it was too strong, but that was what was frustrating us. Our public health officials were not being respected, and our clinics and our hospital were not being respected, we thought. I'm surprised Rod or Reve did not want to ask about steelhead fishing, but I appreciate that you've not brought that up. So
Randy Johnson, and I see Jim McIntyre has a question. Randy?
Yeah, I would just like to echo both Ron's comments and also Mike's. But when I talked to Steve Theringer yesterday, I think it's Bill 1152 talk about the regionalization of healthcare is continuing to move through the system. And Steve thought it would probably move out of whatever group it's in to the next level. So I just want to emphasize again that for those of us that can weigh in, we need to weigh in on that issue. When I read the bill, I think what bothered me in all of us who have sat through the Friday meetings in Clallam County, where our EOC works with Dr. Berry and talks to, whether it be one of the tribal entities or the fire district or whatever, the coordination that's required to work through the entire system with the large expanse that Clallam County has is something that was totally missing in that bill. And I don't know if they even thought about it or even considered, the coordinations required, whether it be when we first started PPE or as we're talking about now, vaccines. And what's really bothersome to me is this bill seems to have feet and starting to move. And so again, I just want to emphasize for everyone, if when you look at our metrics vis-a-vis everyone else, they're certainly good, or certainly better than almost the entirety of the US. And I would think that our system, I wish if they go back and take a look at things, what works, what doesn't, let's then decide how we improve the system. And instead they've kind of decided, well, we need an overlay and so the way the bill reads, it's Kitsap, Jefferson, and Clallam County will all be together with the regional healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just want to tell, everyone again that bill's continuing to move and it's in place. The second thing that was mentioned by Mike very quickly, and it's just an anecdote, but it's an appropriate anecdote. When I listened to the EDC meeting, Colleen, when you last had one, from one of the purveyors of who owns restaurants, and talking about how many weeks of cash they have on hand until they have to make a decision. I mean, that's just happening. And, And you're right, 25% doesn't get us there, but every step helps. So again, I just want to emphasize that. Thank you.
I hope people realize how tireless folks in the medical industry, our public health officials have worked this last year while to try to keep our community as safe and ability to open as much as possible. And, you know, my hat's off to all of them. I've been in their meetings, I've had briefings, their work, it's been on all hands on deck. And I think as a community, we've been really well served by our local professionals. And that's why bills that would take away that authority and that coordination and that local control are really distressing.
All right. I know Jim McIntyre had a question, and then Brian Koo, and then Reve.
Thanks, Colleen. And Mike, thanks for being here this morning. This is more of a comment or an idea than a question. But just to set up the question or the comment, I've been starting to read things about a potential fourth wave of the virus. And I know that the virtual session of the legislature this year has created some, what I would call flow restrictions on legislation, you know, your ability to meet and discuss and pass bills out of committee and off the floor, and things are somewhat restricted this year. So I wonder, and here's the idea, I wonder if it might be a wise thing to think about a special session immediately at the end of the regular session this year, dedicated to really not much more than oversight of the panoply of reactions and responses to the virus thus far, with the idea of, let's see what worked, let's see what worked maybe not in the ways we expected it to. Let's see what didn't work. Let's see what the unintended consequences are. We touched, and you touched earlier on the eviction moratorium and what that's done to the rental market and that kind of thing. So that the legislature has a real focus on how to do this work better in responding to, you know, this current pandemic or a future pandemic, similar to what we've had right now. Just a thought for you. No need to respond unless you just want to, but I'm just thinking about how the legislature might respond to the executive branch's actions over the last year, and see if we could do the work better.
There have been a couple of bills already introduced, and they've had the public hearings, and I'll be interested to read the notes on those hearings. I know that earlier this year, folks were like, why doesn't the legislature call ourselves back in? And quite frankly, we now have rules where we can do that. We actually was one of the first things we did this year was set up official rules where the legislature now can we don't have to wait for the governor, and it's a much simpler process. There is talk of incorporating with executive orders, incorporating the approval of the Four Corners leadership, which would be House Democrats, House Republicans, Senate, and House Democrats and Republicans on all. That process was limited initially. I think there's going to be some work on that makes a lot of sense. You know, again, there are always going to be time for emergency orders, but there's also a time for the public to have a voice and wear your voice. So I think I'm still skeptical we'll actually be done on time. So I think we will have some sort of special session just because of the virtual. And I think that very well, if there was ever a time where I think the public would understand if we just didn't get it all done by April 12th or whatever it is. I mean, that's not the end of the world. It also may behoove us to get another economic forecast in June before we finalize a budget. We'll see, but I think there's a chance that we will be, and lots of hearings are occurring on these issues. Anyway, I know Reve's got an important question, and I have a 9 o'clock that I have to get to.
As do I have a commission meeting at 9, so I'm gonna have to turn this off right then. So Brian Koo, you had a quick question, and then Reve, and then we'll call it a morning.
Thanks, Colleen, and Mike, thanks for being here. It was actually the same question as Jim, so great minds think alike. I appreciate your response to that.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Reve.
Yeah, so I appreciate the opportunity, Representative Chapman. Just kind of generally, so people know, we've been working on the no fishing from a floating device and early closures for steelhead out here on the coastal rivers. And the latest update is on February 1st, they opened up the Skagit and Sauk, which is ESA listed steelhead fisheries for fishing from a floating device 4 days a week through April 15th. We're closed the end of March. It's just amazing to me that that was a choice, that they could compare the two, and their response just flabbergasted me that they just feel like they don't have monitoring programs to be able to track in-season stuff, even though they've had creel data on our rivers here in the Forks area since 1976, and guide log books that were put into effect last year. So I know you've heard from us a lot. I'll open it up if you want to share anything, but I'd also love to take this offline as well and kind of get updates in another time.
Yeah, we've had one call. We need to schedule. We're getting one good news is that we're working on so we've been increasing hatchery production where it's allowed, where there's excess capacity, and we're getting the final numbers for any hatchery that has excess capacity to raise fish. Kevin and I are gonna put together a budget number to make sure that that's not the issue. You know, this has been a frustrating experience. And just for folks who don't know, basically an entire industry was shut down on the West End, the guide service for winter run steelhead. And they were told right before their season, when they had deposits, that they weren't going to be allowed to conduct a guided, you know, fish from a floating device. They can take people down the river and get off and do bank fishing. And I think some of the guides are pretty adept at that, but that was a gut punch to the West End. That's a lot of money that didn't come in. I think I heard 30 to 40% of cancellations, maybe more. That was just another, but it's, we're trying, the Quinault tribe is being a good partner. They're reaching out, they're working with Fish and Wildlife. We're trying to make some progress. It is an issue that Senator Vandeweghe and I have been working on tirelessly, but again, it's an executive branch decision. More to come on that. And but we're definitely looking at making sure every hatchery that has capacity, that has approval from the feds and the native and tribes have the co-coordination of salmon production, but there is some excess capacity and it needs a budget proviso so the Fish and Wildlife, and they're supportive. Fish and Wildlife agrees. Let's raise the fish we can raise. So.
Well, thank you very much.
With that, real quick, the port bill, the expand economic development into ports, that bill, I think that'll be voted out of committee next week. And I think that's a bill that is going to be working its way along. I did reintroduce a couple of pieces of legislation that were vetoed last year by the governor that passed almost unanimously. I don't know if they will move, but I just felt like out of respect for the people that I worked with on both the mills and the auto dealers, the legislation had passed and then it was vetoed and I reintroduced it. We'll see where that goes.
Okay, thank you so much, Representative Chapman. And just one last item, I added in the chat information for businesses that are located in the designated low community areas that, which includes all of Forks, much of Port Angeles, some of Sequim, that you will probably be receiving a targeted advance at sba.gov email, which will allow you to receive the remaining amounts up to $10,000 that you may have received in an idle advance. So if you had a 30% drop of income and you're in that area, you should be looking for targeted advance at sba.gov email in your email accounts. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm sorry we can't stay longer, and thank you so much, Representative Chapman, for spending some time with us this morning and sharing what's happening at the legislative level. It's not an Olympia necessarily, because I think you're at home right now, but thank you for spending time with us and all your tireless efforts that you undertake on behalf of the constituents in the 24th district, especially Clallam. Thank you.
Thanks for everyone, and I'd be glad to come back and after we cut off and talk some more in another month or so. So thanks,
Right.
everyone. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.